Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here, joined as always with, or by, I should say, David Kinnaman, the president of the Barna Group. Hello, David.
How's it going, Carey? Good to see you.
It's going well, all things considered. Yeah, you said recently we're 2 years into this. Isn't that crazy? 2 years and 200 years.
And
Remember
the
that
world,
world that used to
I,
exist?
I barely do, although there are signs of it coming back. I should say that the world's just a better place because of this podcast, and and so we can just sort of look back over 2 years and however many episodes it's been of Church Pulse Weekly, and we're so grateful to you as listeners. We hear from people all the time who are benefited by this podcast and the conversations that we've been having and the data. Clearly we're out of the crisis management mode of the early days of the pandemic, but helping churches to navigate, church leaders to navigate change is at the heart of Barna's mission and it's been at the heart of this podcast since the beginning. So thanks so much for tuning in and for being a part of this journey over the last couple of years or however long you've been tuning in.
Well, and there's the idea of acute crisis. We started it when the pandemic hit because we were all trying to figure out what to do. But I would say, I think you can make an argument that the crisis has gone from acute to chronic. It's kind of like, now we're like, okay, church attendance isn't what we thought. The model probably wasn't working before COVID. It's definitely not working now. And we definitely have had some really great insight on this podcast. But I think there's also a lot of comfort from just hearing from other leaders, at least there is for me, that, yeah, we're in this too, and we don't have all the answers either, which ironically, I think it's okay to hear that. I remember
Yeah.
being, getting to know Andy Stanley about maybe 15, 17 years ago or whatever it was. And I remember being in a room with Andy and I asked him a question and his answer was, I don't know. And that was like strangely comforting for me as a younger church leader at that time, because I'm like, well, if Andy doesn't know, I guess there's hope for me, right? And so it's not that we have all the answers, but hopefully we're asking thoughtful questions and providing a little bit of guidance as to where the future might be. And in a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Albert Tate. But today, we want to talk about the roots of racism, the perceptions of race problems, and the church's involvement in race relations. Albert's got a brand new book that I had the privilege of endorsing. It is a very good book. I would highly recommend it. We'll talk about that. But David, you've got a few statistics you want to update us on. So where do you want to start today?
Well, for the last 2 years, Barna Group has been doing even more work than it has historically on issues of race and race in the church. And we've released a couple major studies, one called Where Do We Go From Here, another called Beyond Diversity, and then another called Trends in the Black Church. So, I'm very proud of our team. We've got some incredible partners. We've taken some hits from doing it, and I'm glad to have. It means we're doing the right kind of work. We still have a long way to go as an organization, and a lot of things that even in my own leadership and in our purview we're taking stock of. And so that's just to sort of to begin to start. Like, I think this last couple of years, in addition to all the other major challenges and questions and things that have sort of been pulled to the surface through the pandemic and related crises, this question of race and how that all shows up. So that's just kind of a context place to begin. The hard work that we, especially as white leaders, have to do, and just continue to be committed to that. So as we dive in, I just want to sort of say that the data that I'm about to present, like, it's not easy. It's hard. 3 in 5 white practicing Christians say that personal prejudice is a bigger problem than discrimination that is built into institutions. So the vast majority of white practicing Christians believe that it's personal prejudice that's primarily the challenge. What we find, though, is that 2 in 3 Black practicing Christians say that institutional discrimination is a bigger problem than personal prejudice. And it's not necessarily an either or. We've sort of set this up as a survey question to sort of compare attitudes more than we are in terms of actually diagnosing the problem. But there's just like the lived experience of Black practicing Christians is quite different than the lived experience and perceptions of white Christians. So I think that's just one place to begin, is that, as we seek to understand differences across our society, and then as we seek to understand differences within the church, there's quite a gap when it comes to practicing Christians based on their ethnicity and their experiences.
You've also got some statistics on the perceptions of race problems that was interesting. What are you finding there?
Well, we discovered in our research that 1 in 5 of all practicing Christians, which would include across the racial spectrum, say that race is not at all a current problem in the U.S. So 1 in 5, that was as of the summer of 2020. That's
Huh.
actually up from 11% in 2019. So we've done some really good reporting. Our team has, and the data is pretty compelling in a really not so positive way, that a lot of the racial unrest of the summer of 2020 actually, it helped open up certain people, certain segment of the population. Some Christians grew in their responsiveness and their open-heartedness to issues of race, but another segment of the population and a segment of Christians actually became even more resistant to the notion that race was an issue, is an issue. And so that's a reflection there. So it went from 11% in 2019 who said it's not a problem to 19%. So there was a growing number of people who said there's just too much talk about race and racial reconciliation, race issues. So that was another, sort of, as we look at data related to race and race perceptions, there's always sort of some soul searching. I think we have to do as we think about what this might mean for us as we lead.
Wow. And then there were some other findings on the church's involvement in race relations. Can you walk us through that before we bring Albert on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Again, I'm so proud of our team, the good work of a broad range of people, and then being able to hear from leaders. Just for more than 30 years at Barna, we've been able to really talk about the strength of the Black church. It's the Black population of America is actually much more spiritual, much more Christian, much more centered in their faith in Jesus, really, than white Americans are, or even white Christians. So there's so many good things to say. But as we took a deeper dive on what people perceive are the top reasons that the church should not be involved in improving racial reconciliation. So we're trying to understand, like, what are the barriers that Christians feel are there? Why would they not want to do this? Which seems like such a self-evident proposition. But we found that 46% of practicing Christians who believe that the church should not be involved said that it's not the church's job. So they think it's not the church's job to address racial reconciliation. The second item on that list was that racism isn't really an issue, and 26% of those practicing Christians who said that the church shouldn't be involved cited that issue. And then finally, 18% said the church doesn't have the training to address racial injustice. And so that's the only place where you might say, maybe we might agree on that. It's not, so much of a complete negative that people don't want to see the church involved in racial reconciliation. They don't see the church being capable and having the tools and the training to address the deep roots and particular challenges of racial injustice. And that was, again, at 18%. So 46% said it's not the church's job. 26% said the church, racism isn't an issue. And then 18% said the church doesn't have the training to address racial injustice. Those were the top 3 reasons that practicing Christians believe the church should not be addressing those things, which of course is what we're here to talk about, is how can the church have those tools, the training, the perspectives, the insights. And I know you and I have learned a lot from Albert Tate through the last couple of years and even before that in our friendship. So we're grateful to have Albert on with us today.
I have learned a lot from Albert. I've also learned an awful lot, honestly, David, just being totally transparent, doing this show with you. Your commitment to studying this problem, seeing some statistics, interviewing the guests has really, I think about how I thought about this. And I was always concerned about racism, but I think my understanding of it has really shifted and grown over the last 2 years, and I'm incredibly grateful for it and looking to learning more. With that, we'll bring on Albert Tate. Albert is a pastor, public speaker, podcast host, and a Mississippi native who accepted a call to ministry at 21 years old. In 2011, Albert founded Fellowship Monrovia in Monrovia, California, which has a loyal congregation and 20,000 viewers watching its online services. He often speaks at camps, college revivals, and is also deeply involved in the international church planting movement and is a catalyst of LA church planting. Albert is also a teaching pastor at Willow Creek Church. Albert, so good to have you with us again today. Welcome back.
So good to be with you guys. Always good.
So those stats, I would love any thoughts, reaction you have on those, knowing that you've done a deep dive into this as well, writing your first book, which deals a lot with the issues of race in America.
Yo, David, I thought it was just absolutely fascinating. But it also makes sense that when you say those stats, I was like, yep, I didn't know that stat, but I can feel that. I can sense that in the reality and in the nature of the conversations that we have. We are just highly incentivized to disregard this issue. Like the amount of reward for white culture to ignore this is huge. Like it's just there are pundits, there are leaders, there are minority leaders that get paid a lot of money to make whites feel very comfortable with not engaging in this conversation. So when I
Mm.
hear those stats, I think, wow, yeah, it's a real thing. And I appreciate I appreciate David the work that you and Barna have intentionally done, especially with the celebration of the power of the Black church and the significance and the orthodoxy, the legitimacy of the Black church, and how sound and how strong it is, and how it's been the foundation of our faith, and it's produced great patriots. It's produced great Christian leaders. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, thank you for saying all that, Albert. It means a lot.
When you say incentivized, tell me more about that because you write about that in your book too.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's behind that?
Yeah. I think pundits, articles make people just think about CRT and how it's just become a whole thing. Now, I I'll go on the line. David will give you $100 if you can actually explain what CRT actually is, or if you've read more than 2 pages about it. All you've seen was a tweet or an article. So the amount of opinion that we have on such little study is fascinating, but it's something that meets what I feel or where I want to be. So we're incentivized not to read, not to study, not to bring a critical engagement to it. But it's like the way I say it at our church, and I feel like this happens with pundit, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. Pick your poison. Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Don Lemon, Rachel Maddow. I think they're discipling Christians more than pastors are and the Bible is. And I think you listen to these pundits, you listen to them make it seem like it's not a big deal, and you walk away feeling better about loving people less. And I think if there's anything that makes you feel better about loving less, then it's probably God less. Like they relieve
Hmm.
you of the burden to care. They relieve you of the burden to even be lovingly curious about the burdens that our brothers and sisters who are immigrating uh, carry. Our brothers and sisters who are afraid of police and the dynamic there. They just incentivize you and don't even care, don't even listen. It's Marxism or it's socialism or it's race baiting. They give you an extreme example so that way you can go to sleep tonight not carrying that burden at all. You're just highly incentivized in my mind to not care, which is when you really step back and think about it, it's the most unbiblical thing, the most ungodly thing. Jesus calls us to not only neighbor love, but he calls us to enemy love. So even if you didn't even agree with it, there's still a call to love in a way that's honoring. And I just think we've just given ourselves cultural permission to be very mean, unkind, dismissive, and have low regard for our brothers and sisters in Christ who are having a different experience. And you can prove that stat not with a local Barna study, but just a local comment section study in Facebook. Just look in the comment sections and see how rude people are in the name of Jesus in disregarding the burdens that our brothers and sisters carry that are different than us, that maybe don't look like us, live like us, or vote like us.
Do you feel, because I think the stats pointed in this direction, that we have become more united or more divided over the last few years
Oh my
as a
goodness.
church?
The last couple of years, I've been working on this language. I ain't got it down yet, but I currently call it the radicalization of
Yeah.
Christians. Like, you know how they say Muslims get radicalized? I've just had people that were normal 2.5 years ago. Like they were just a normal person. And now you can't talk to them without them leading with their opinion or their offense about picket, vaccinations, politics, race, and how is it? I mean, they are so radicalized. I feel like the call of the day is not the center. The call of the day is find your fringe group and then rally like crazy. Find your tribe and go to the fringes. No one's talking about coming together. Everyone's talking about how much of an idiot the people that have the opposite perspective of you are. And the world, that's great when that happens in the world. But I've seen it happen in the church. Most pastors I know have lost people over issues over mask or vaccination or Trump or Biden or race or I'm pro police. I'm not Black Lives Matter. I'm Blue Lives Matter. And oh my, I think the culmination of the COVID, we can't blame it all on COVID. I think COVID exposed it, what was already there, and then people just got radicalized. Aunties have gotten radicalized. You remember your auntie used to be able to just come over and be fine? Now she's like, y'all wearing masks? I'm not coming over there because I believe in faith and not fear. Well, it's like Auntie Granny got lupus. Like she can't. It's like, well, I'm not coming. If y'all wear masks, I'm not coming. Like crazy stuff like that. It's just family members that just to be used to be normal, but now it's gotten radicalized. So I think it's worse now than it's been, at least in my generation. We're experiencing this radicalization and we've lost the vision of what it is to really love one another. Most of the time when Jesus is talking about love, he's not talking about people that's easy to love. He's talking about those people that are very difficult to love. That's why he's talking about it. He doesn't have to do whole segments on people on how to love your grandma. Your grandma's sweet. Most of us are sweet. So this ain't an article about love. He's saying for people that are hard to love, this is what love should look like for them. Patience, kind. Why? Because it's going to be more easy to be mean and impatient with them. So that's why he's saying this is what love needs to look like.
It's funny you use the word radicalization because I've followed a number of people for years on social channels, like better part of a decade or more. And in the last 2 years, particularly leading up to the 2020 election and now where we are with the war in Ukraine and everything, I have seen more political stands, more slamming whoever happens to be in the White House or wherever. And honestly, more, and I speak this as a Canadian, more people talking about guns and violence on normal, and I don't follow fringe groups. This is just like people that you would have over for dinner. More stuff about guns, revenge, and violence. And this is coming from Christians. And I don't know, Albert, comment on that. Do you see that too? Like just talk about that radicalization.
Oh, yo, it's scary. That's why I feel like we've got to come back to love. We've got to have a conversation about love, and we've got to remember because we've made love ambiguous. Love is not ambiguous. Love is not like Dwayne the Rock Johnson. Y'all know how the Rock. He's culturally ambiguous. You don't know what he is. Is he black? Is he white? Look, he could be Latino. No. He's Pacific Islander. We don't know what the Rock is. No, love is more so like Chris Rock. We know Chris Rock is black. Ain't nobody looking at Chris Rock saying, I wonder what Chris is. No, Chris is black. We know what Chris is. I think that's what love is. And love is really clear of what it is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not self-seeking. Love does not hold long accounts. Love is empathy. Just empathy. Empathy means we love one another. And empathy fixing is not required. And watch this, agreement isn't even required to show empathy to someone, but our inability to show empathy to people that are different from us, to the immigrant, to folks that are wrestling through realities of George Floyd and racism, and our white brothers and sisters really struggle. Christian brothers and sisters really struggle with showing up in empathy in that moment. Like I had a guy. I made a comment when those folks at the massage parlor got killed, and this was at the height of Asian hate. So, in an effort to try to express empathy for my Asian brothers and sisters, because they're feeling it in a way that I don't. They're worried about grandparents walking down the street. Y'all saw some of the videos. People were just getting beat up because they were Asian, just getting knocked upside the head just because they're Asian. So to have someone be murdered in this whole series of shops and stuff, and it was the first couple of days. So I just made a post. Immediately, a guy came in my comment section. Albert, where's the evidence that shows this is Asian hate? And I just thought, what a missed opportunity to love well our Asian siblings that have a burden, whether you agree with it or not. Empathy does not even require your agreement. You're looking for evidence, and what's needed in that moment is empathy. You're showing up looking for evidence, and we need empathy in that moment. I think we forget, y'all, that we are extra mile Christians. Jesus said, when the Roman Empire, oppressive as it was, if you were 12 years old or older, you were required by law, if a Roman soldier asked you to carry their pack, which was a heavy pack, to carry it for a mile. So a 16-year-old kid that sees a Roman soldier getting off his horse, it ain't trying to make eye contact. He looking over, he trying to back away quick because that Roman soldier will see him and say, come here, boy, carry this pack. And by law, he's required to carry it for a whole mile. Now watch this. Jesus, that 16-year-old boy hearing Jesus in his ear, at the end of that exhausting mile, would look at him and say, dear sir, I would find joy in carrying your pack an extra mile. Now, for once, we always think about what it would take for us to even say something like that. But imagine what it would take, what would happen, and what happens to the Roman soldier who hears that. Reggie Joyner says this: the first mile was to fulfill a requirement. The second mile was an opportunity to transform a relationship. Imagine the Roman soldier hearing that kind of posture, that kind of, immediately he's going to say, who are you? What are you? And oh, what joy to say, I'm a Christian. And I have no problem carrying this oppressive pack for an extra mile. What if when it came to people that don't look like us, look like us, live like us, or even vote like us, for us to say in conversations that were hard, conversations that we would be tempted to defend ourselves, to say, I want to go an extra mile listening to your narrative. I want to go an extra mile listening to your burden. I want to go an extra mile so that I might sit fully under what you are carrying. We've lost that extra mile Christianness in us. We won't even go the first mile before we start spouting off our defenses, our offenses, and our rights. The worst thing that could happen to you is not that you be offended. I think we are I'm offended. I'm leaving the church. I'm offended. I'm not listening to Carey no more. I'm offended. Barner's talking about too much race. I'm offended. So everybody's thinking that being offended is the worst thing that can happen. No, being offended is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Not loving those that offend you could be the worst thing that ever happened to you, because that puts us in a place to where we're not loving like God called us to love.
I know you're interested in facilitating a conversation in the church, and I am too. But on the subject of empathy, like in your book, and I read it maybe 6 months ago, whenever you sent it to those of us who had the privilege of reading it and endorsing it. But, Albert, you and I have hung out. We've known each other moderately well over the
Yeah.
last few years. There were things I just had no idea of. And it was like, oh, that was a painful chapter to think about what happened to you, what happened to your family. Then I open up the next chapter and it's more painful. And then I open up the next chapter and it's more painful. And like I was like, oh my gosh, this is just insane. And so I've got to believe that underneath that, it's not I need to moderate my story. I need to make my story nicer for you so you can take it. But like empathy, like help me understand that it's not a question of people hiding their attitudes or their experiences. What kind of dialogue are you trying to facilitate by being so open and transparent about how racism has impacted your own personal life? This is a very painful but powerful book to read.
Yeah, my church is majority white, and I've navigated multi-ethnic spaces, and I have great relationships. Some of my best friends, my deepest relationships are multi-ethnic, and that's Asian, Latino, white, the whole deal. But if we're going to talk about loving one another, we just need to talk about what love is. And how do we love one another well? It's a big deal with how we treat one another and how we see one another. The Ten Commandments, the first time you see justice, half of them are about your relationship with God, the other half about our relationship with one another. When you look at the Sermon on the Mount, he's talking about how we care for and how we love one another. Even when you think about the power of the cross, it is both vertical and horizontal. It's a big deal to God with how we treat one another. And I just feel like we've lost the understanding of what love is. So love requires empathy. It requires sacrifice. Love pursues justice. And love extends grace. And I think it starts with empathy, because if I can't even tell my story without having to defend my tears, if I've got to prove to you my own pain, Empathy means you just sit and be with me. And even if you don't agree with me, just think about the biggest act of empathy we find in Jesus. The incarnation is the biggest move of empathy we've ever seen. God steps down the ladder into time and space through Jesus Christ so that he might become Emmanuel, God with us. He put on flesh and dwelt among us. Why? That is empathy. He says, before I save you, before I deliver you, I want you to know that I understand you. I know where you are. Think he's crying. Jesus wept at Lazarus. Jesus, you about to raise the boy up. Why are you wasting time crying? You about to fix it. He says, yeah, my fixing it though isn't as important as me sitting with Mary and Martha and them knowing, wow, Jesus feels my pain. Even though he doesn't agree with it. They're crying over something he about to fix. So it's not about empathy is not about agreement. Okay, I agree with you. I'm willing to sit with you. What I found, y'all, is that Christians, man, we got really big convictions and really anemic compassion. And,
Ooh.
and if you can't hold my convictions, then I withhold my compassion. And Jesus just never does that to us. So we think in order to enter into this conversation about race with compassion, we got to have the same conviction. So Black Lives Matter, we got different convictions. So no, I ain't giving you no love there. They believe stuff that's just different. Well, so does John Hagee. So does Josh McDowell, John MacArthur. We don't all agree on everything, but we're still called to love one another. But we make a big deal. If I don't agree with you theologically, I am going to withhold compassion from you. And we've got really big conviction and really anemic compassion, and that's messing up. It's destroying our witness. Jesus says, "You gonna know us by our doctrine, our opinion, what ticks us off." What offends us? No, he says, you're going to know my people. You're going to know my sons and daughters because of how they love. And you just got to know he has in mind all the people that we won't agree with that we're still called to love. So I think in order for us to move forward, we've got to be willing to show compassion and not allow our convictions to give us a freedom to withhold our compassion in the name of Jesus.
I think there's some of the research we talked about at the front of the show suggests that some people grew in their compassion and their empathy over the last couple of years, and others became even more recalcitrant,
Yep.
entrenched
Yep.
in their view that there really is nothing to see here. What have you seen to be the sort of the best ways to, especially for us as white leaders, grow in empathy, the right kind of empathy that actually produces the kind of fertile ground where real growth can occur? And then, is there any way that with some people that sort of feel maybe more entrenched, is there any way to soften that ground at all?
Yeah, I think where we start the conversation is a really big deal. I think we started racial reconciliation as an application, but we haven't set in love as a revelation. So if we jump to application without a revelation of love, I think it's just going to be really hard because we've got to till the
Hmm.
soil of the soul to remind us what love is. I talk about it like this. I had a trainer named Justice. His name was Justice, which is not a great name for a trainer because whenever he calls, he'd be like, Justice is calling. But I worked out for the first time in a long time, man, getting ready for a half marathon. And the first 20 minutes, I was sweating. I was about to quit. I was like, and so when he finally said, "All right, Albert," I was like, "Whew, I'm glad that's over." I didn't think I was gonna make it. He was like, "All right, let's get the workout started." I said, "Say what?" He said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was just stretching." I was like, "What? I'm about to pass out. That was just stretching." He says, "Yeah, because you got to stretch before you can begin to do the workout. Because if you do the workout before you're stretched, then you're probably going to hurt yourself." The next day, you guys already know because y'all work out. You know what happened to me. I woke up and I was sore, like unbelievably sore. Like, I'm not going to do that again sore. Like, why would I put myself through this kind of pain? I can barely walk sore. But people that work out know that, Albert, what do you, that's not an invitation to quit. That actually is an indicator that you had a good workout because you're sore. And what do? You don't quit. You go to work out again because you work through the soreness. Because on the other side of the soreness is strength. What I've realized about many of us in our Christian culture currently is we don't know how to be sore and not quit. So you'll hear a comment, you'll hear a podcast. Somebody already heard something that I said and they're sore and they want to quit the conversation. They want to stop listening. They want to cancel me. They want to cancel the conversation because they don't know how to work through the soreness. Usually, soreness exposes underdeveloped muscles. So you're probably most sore in the areas where you're most underdeveloped. I don't know about y'all, but when I work out, and I haven't worked out a long time, I feel stuff in areas I didn't even know muscles was over there. It's like, what is that? So when we get sore as Christians, we leave with the church. We go to another church that's going to make us less sore, that we will feel more comfortable in, because we have an idolatry for comfort and not a calling for kingdom. And I think when I get sore, when I hear something, I look at it and say, I wonder what underexposed muscle this is showing me. And this is an invitation for me not to be defensive now. It's an invitation for me to listen more. And I think if we start, white leaders, if we started the conversation there, and as we talk about racial reconciliation, if we just say up front, we're all going to get sore in doing this work. Soreness is not a sign to quit. Soreness is an opportunity to develop an area that's probably underdeveloped and could use some more attention. And on the other side of this soreness, I think the body of Christ will be stronger.
I know a huge part of your ministry is preaching, and we have thousands of preachers listening to this episode. What role can preaching play? I mean, obviously, when there's a crisis event like we've had numerous over the last number of years, a lot of pastors get up to say something, post something on social. But day to day, what role can preaching play in racial reconciliation? And then what are some really like helpful things pastors who want to make a difference and want to advance the dialogue can do in their day-to-day preaching?
Yeah, I think the best preaching, whether it's race, whether it's Haggai, whether it's the book of Galatians, the best preaching comes from being saturated in whatever that is. So spending time so that way when you preach, it preaches authentically out of who you are. So I would ask, especially my white brothers and sisters, do you have any minority mentors? Have you been at a conference in the last year or two where you were actually a minority? What would it mean for you to put yourself in a position to be a student, bring your assumptions, but have someone speak into those assumptions? How many books have you read? Would you preach on Romans without doing a deep dive and studying it and sitting in it? If you're going to talk about race and racial reconciliation, which I think that's a form of spiritual formation, because from Genesis all the way to Revelation, Jesus makes a really big deal on how we care for one another, and how we care for one another is saturated in the challenges of racial reconciliation. So I think it is a spiritual, not elective, but a spiritual core curriculum for developing and growing in maturity. Have you become a student? And can you preach as a student? Most of the times we stand as authorities, and let's just be honest, I'm not an authority on this. And here's the other thing that I just think is really big. Everyone's scared of being called a racist. Like everybody's scared. Like, man, what if I come off as a racist? What if I come off well, the worst thing that could happen to you is not you being accused of a racist. The worst thing that could happen is you actually be one, not know it, and not do anything about it. That's what would be bad. So I tell people I'm a recovering racist. I've got bias. I've got prejudice. Of course I do. In many areas, because I was born in sin and shaped in iniquity. I just think, why do we give Satan so much credit when it comes to racism? If I ask, has anybody ever committed adultery? Well, in my mind, I have sinned. So yes, I have. Anybody, in every other area, we'd be like, yeah, but for the grace of God. But when it comes to racism, it's like, no, not me, never. Oh, okay. So the devil just gives you a pass on that. So institutions aren't racist because the Satan's was like, oh, I want to make everything evil. Oh, but not institutions as racism. No, I would never do that. Like, why do we assume that Satan wouldn't work in those areas? Of course he would. So it's not in a defense of you. It's an acknowledgement. So we spend a lot of time saying, I am not. I am not. What if we changed our posture and said, I am, but for the grace of God? I don't know about y'all, but when I see leaders fall through adultery or all that, now I don't plan on doing any of that stuff, but I've been around long enough to know that I don't need to have any confidence in my flesh. So when I see somebody fall, I'll never say, I'll never do something like that. I say, I would, but for the grace of God. Am I a racist? I am not a racist. No, no, no. I probably am. Homophobic, transphobic, a bigot, ignorant of Chinese culture, ignorant of. I am. I'm not malicious, and I don't intend to be. But I'd imagine if we start digging deep down in my story and how I show up, and even the things that I'm ignorant of right now, I want to enter this conversation with the posture that says, you know what, I could be, but for the grace of God. And I'm asking you through our relationship and through my learning that I would for grace to trust him more in this area of race. For grace to trust him more. I think if we spent less energy trying to defend the fact that we're not, and more of an open heart that said, you know what, I could be, but for the grace of God, let me learn and let me invite the Holy Spirit to work in my life. So if there's anything in me that's not like I intend for it to be, if there's anything that's in me that's racist or sexist or homophobic, oh, Holy Spirit, search me. Christian, we have that posture on every other issue. But when it comes to race, we don't have that posture. It's like that goes out the window. And I am not, I am not. Every other area was like, I am, but for the grace of God. So I would invite that posture in to our pastors, to our preachers, and preach from that place. I am, but for the grace of God. And whoo, like every Sunday, like every other issue, I think the Spirit would move in a powerful way.
Albert, it's been an incredible conversation. David, any closing thoughts as we wrap up today?
No, I just appreciate your friendship, Albert. And we've been talking about getting you up to Ventura to see my home remodel for a while. We got to figure that out.
Yeah, see that kitchen before you mess it up.
No, you're a good friend. To you've been on the program a few times, and I'm just sort of sitting back here, listening to your wisdom, like so simple and so clear. And I hope many of our listeners are able to use this similar language and pray it through. I love this idea of being saturated in the things we're going to teach, and teaching from the position of a student as opposed to an authority.
Yeah,
I think those are things that everyone needs to do, but especially for the sake of younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, they see through the posturing. They see when we try to teach from a position of authority and unmerited authority, and I think they're hungry for people that can teach from a position of being a student and having been saturated in what it is that they're learning and seeing. And so anyway, I appreciate that among many other things that you've been able to share today.
Wow, thank you so much.
Albert, David, thank you so much. Albert Tate's new book is called How We Love Matters. It's available everywhere. Subtitle is A Call to Practice Relentless Racial Reconciliation. Yeah. Albert, I'm so grateful that you're in my life. So grateful that, you use your voice to help a lot of us understand what we need to do, God's heart for all of creation. And so excited. Congrats on your new book.
Thank you so much, guys. I love you. Love being on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, for all of you who are listening, please share this with somebody that you think needs to hear it. Leave us a rating and review, and we'll catch you next time on Church Pulse Weekly.